Today, I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Chris Jenkins, who just has such energy around ethics and biosafety. And I think it's one of those topics that we don't always think about as being an amazing part of our field, but it really is. And I think Dr. Jenkins really brings that out. So he is going to describe, among other things, what an institutional review board is, IRB, and an institutional biosafety committee, IBC, and why biosafety is so important and exciting. Enjoy. I learned a lot. I hope you do too. So, Chris, you're the owner and chief scientific officer for Sabai Global, which has several subsidiaries. And the two that I was most interested in talking to you about this concept for was Clinical Biosafety Services and Castle Institutional Review Board, IRB. And the reason I want to talk to you about this is because our industry has a critical workforce issue, and that's what the series is on, and that people don't generally intentionally enter clinical research. And so we don't have enough clinical research professionals entering the field, and that makes it difficult to conduct trials in a timely fashion. So I have to imagine that the ethics and biosafety sides of clinical research are even less known career choices. So if you could please describe what an IRB is, an IBC, and what we mean by biosafety, I would love that for our audience.
Yes. Yeah. For an IRB, an institutional review board, this goes back to the mid 1900s. An IRB is required under both international as well as the Belmont Report law that if you are doing research on fellow humans of any kind, you need to get their consent to do so. And in order to do so, you need to have the science behind the research. In order to understand as a participant what risks and benefits you're enrolling into, the person sponsoring the research has to present those risks and benefits to a third party, the institutional review board, composed of experts in that field, to say, yes, this is a safe research to do for the risk benefit, or you need to change your protocol before we can allow this to go into humans. It can range from anything from taking blood samples out of people so that you get consent for blood, to having an experimental drug or device implanted into somebody or given to somebody to treat a rare form of disease or cancer. You're doing something to someone else's body. You have to get consent for that, and that's approved by an institutional review board. For an IBC, or a biosafety, I like to think of the IBC as where is the drug at all times. So a biosafety committee is concerned with the patient and the research subject, but they're actually more concerned about, is the drug only going into that patient, and how do we minimize it going to the clinic, to the exposure to the pharmacist, to the nurse, to the doctor. There are certain diseases where the family members are being treated, and I always use Duchenne's muscular dystrophy or spinal muscular atrophy for this, where they're using a virus to carry the gene to correct a form of this rare disease. The virus is a biologic. And so if you're exposed, you're treating a 2-year-old child with this virus, and the brother is 5 years old, but also has the disease. If they're accidentally exposed to a low level of the virus, they'll develop antibodies, and a future treatment for them will be useless because their body will negate it if they're exposed. And so IBC is concerned with, how do we keep the virus or treatment or the biologic inside of the patient only, and not elsewhere, not into the pharmacist's eyes as in pulling it out of the vial and drafting the bag, and from the nurse who's doing the infusion line or putting it into the patient, or family members who have to change the wound site or any type of handling of the bandages. How is it minimized? The biosafety is, how do we keep that drug in the patient, or and minimally handle it at all times. The other phrase I like to say is, we try to prevent the zombie outbreak. That's really what we're trying to do here. And everyone sort of gets it when I say it that way.
Yeah, I've been in this industry for 18 years, and that is the best description I've ever heard of biosafety. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you for that. So it sounds to me, please correct me if I'm wrong, that if you're in biosafety, you probably have a background in biology, or is that not a necessary path to biosafety?
It's not necessarily. We have a ton of people in our organization that come from backgrounds outside of what I'll call the traditional bench sciences of like microbiology, virology, general sciences. But folks that do come up, they'll come up through regulatory pathway, usually through like an office of research compliance in the hospital, or there'll be a clinical research regulatory coordinator responsible for doing submission to the IRB or IBC or to the various committees inside of their hospital system or academic medical center. And so those folks get familiar with what's required to dot the I and cross the T's on a clinical trial. And so those are the kind of folks that we really like to hire into our organization, is folks that have high attention to detail, can review really complicated science. They don't necessarily have to understand the science. They just have to know where it fits into a category of regulatory requirements. Does that mean it needs a full board review, or can it be reviewed by a single reviewer? Is it something that is going to harm the patient more or less? And so having sciences is helpful, not necessarily. And some of our best IRB reviewers come from, with psychology backgrounds, or, some of our best reviewers are former librarians and school teachers. Lots of attention and wrangling little details. But I will say that the sort of standard pathway for biosafety is they are a bench scientist who got tired of living off the soft money. They transitioned into research regulatory at their university, and then they came over to us. On the IRB side, they usually were doing like psychology or general research, and then got into their university IRB, and then they came over to us.